Hey everyone, welcome back to the Sports Psych Show. So today I'm going to be speaking with Dr. Andy Hill. Andy, welcome to the Sports Psych Show.
Hi Dan, thanks very much.
It's great to have you on. Now, why don't you introduce yourself to the Sports Psych Show audience? Who are you? What have you done? What's your PhD in?
Yeah, brilliant. All right, so I work. I have a couple of roles that I currently work in. So I work at Blackburn Rovers Football Club, doing performance site there, predominantly with the academy. So that kind of spans from 9s to 23s, but it's as the years go on, it's spilling on into first team squad, which is good. Also work for the English Institute of Sport, supporting British para table tennis work. That's a relatively new role for me there. Working in a sport that I knew absolutely nothing about when I started, so that was as an interesting challenge. I guess my academic background kind of comes from a coaching perspective, really, more so than a psych. So yeah, sort of my undergrad and my masters were in coaching, but my PhD, kind of the big driving question that I took out of my masters was kind of what gets people to the top, kind of what makes the elite, and kind of carried that through into the PhD really. So we started looking at the psycho-behaviorally based features of effective talent development, which is a bit of a mouthful, but basically, what do these people do and what do they not do that separates them from those who don't make it? So the PhD looked at predominantly what we call psychological characteristics of developing excellence, or PCDEs, as I think we'd probably better call them for the rest of the show. And that was building on a lot of the work of Dr. Anya McNamara and Professor Dave Collins, and they've done quite a lot of work on that. So sort of identifying these characteristics and looking at how they translate and operationalize in the real world. And sort of my role was basically developing a tool to help monitor them really, and look at how we can measure them and what other sort of stuff is there that kind of maybe hinders the pathway. So that's that. So a lot of developmental emphasis really, I suppose, which kind of fits with my role at the academy. But I mean, I think an issue I've always kind of wondered is if you were to ask an athlete when they stopped developing, what their answer would be. So I think there's a lot of the stuff that does translate to high performance because everybody's continually getting better.
Absolutely. Interesting, and my ears pricked up there with the term psychological characteristics of developing excellence, because it's actually something, PCDEs, as you say, it's an area that we haven't touched upon on the Sports Psych Show as yet. So it would be great to have a conversation around this. Just going back to that PhD, you studied what gets people to the top. So I assume that was from a psychological perspective?
Yeah, very much so. And kind of going into, when I first asked myself that question, I was kind of right across the board. But obviously, as the level of performance increases, this kind of playing field tends to level out, there or thereabouts, maybe not quite very level, if you will, but levels out from a physical point of view, from a technical point of view, tactical point of view, looking at sort of the four corners thing. But for me, it was the cycling that became dominant. So, example we kind of often use when I'm sort of introducing the concept to young athletes is you could have the best S&C program in the world. You could have world experts written a program for you. You could be in the gym. The weights could be on the rack ready. There's no one there or thereabouts to lift them. Now, if you want to get better, you have to walk over to the weights and you have to lift the weights yourself. You could easily tick a box on a piece of paper, say you've done it, go away. No one will be none the wiser, but you won't get better. So for me, it is about the attitude, the psychology, if you will, the motivation, all that sort of stuff that drives people to excel. So even excelling from a physical point of view, for me, is underpinned by psychology. Excelling at a technical point of view is it's all driven by the psych component. So that's kind of why it focused on that. And these PCDEs, there are a range of skills. So there's 10 different skills. I'll quickly fly through them. So there's commitment and role clarity. There's coping with pressure, focus and distraction control. Things like goal setting, imagery, planning and organisation, quality practice, so performance evaluation, sort of self-regulation, and creating and using support networks as well is a big one. So all these kind of things that the research has shown, and conversation with coaches have shown that actually these are what takes those who've been successful. These are the things that got them there.
I love the way you stripped it back with regard to the example of the gym, and we are going to concentrate on those PCDEs. But I just before we do that, and the PCDEs are involved here, but I love the way you said, look, you can take a gym, you can take a set of weights, you've got soccer players and competitors from all sports walking into that gym. You can have the best S&C coach in the world, you can have the best S&C program, and obviously we're looking at the physical side of sport here, but to actually engage in lifting, engage in what you've got to do in the gym, that requires psychological characteristics, and that requires optimizing those psychological characteristics in order to optimize your S&C program, your physical program in this respect. And so I think we share a common belief here whereby we can talk about four corner models, and I understand sports do that, particularly in soccer, football, soccer here in England, but ultimately my belief, and I think this is what you're saying, Andy, is that the psychosocial side drives the physical, technical, and tactical sides of development and performance.
Absolutely, because everyone's full of potential in a given area. I suppose there's the Einstein things if you judge a fish on its ability to ride a bike, but certainly we've all got this potential to unlock, but it doesn't just unlock itself. I think to exploit the physical potential that we have, it takes lots of different psychological elements to really tap into that and maximize that. And same with the technical stuff. Even something as simple or as straightforward as enjoying what you do. It's a big part of why people play sport and why they get into sport in the first place. So that psychological element is massive.
I think, as you said there, that I always talk about 3 Ps: participation, progression, and performance. Participation, progression, and performance. Participation piece being the engagement piece, as you said there, having fun. What helps? What do coaches have to do to help players engage in the activities they're about to engage in? How do coaches help players progress? How do coaches help players perform from a psychological perspective? It's interesting. I mean, do you find this is something that coaches don't always get? Is that psychosocial pieces driving the other areas?
I think to be fair, we're pretty lucky now with where we're at as an academy, in that that they're kind of pretty much fully on board with it. That's not happened overnight, and there'll be other academies, and other academies out there who are in in different positions, but we tend to be quite good at it now because we put a lot of emphasis on it, and we've looked at it quite a lot. Got a very good head of coaching who's on board, and that makes a big difference as a psychologist. If you've got somebody there who's kind of on the same wavelength as you and sees the value in it, because if you don't have that partnership working well, speaking from experience, it's pretty difficult. But yeah, so the things like the engagement side of it, that fun element, we really kind of get that the system understands how important that is, particularly at the younger age. As far as the fun goes, I think you do anything for long enough, you start to see the downsides to it. And some of these kids will have been with us for a decade until they reach the under-23s and the sharper end of professional football as well. So I think trying to be able to maintain that enjoyment is really, really important. I think the coaches now, I think the way the coach education program is going, particularly in football or soccer, is very much becoming a big emphasis on this.
Yes.
And you're starting to see it now with almost like a new wave of coaches coming through. Sort of younger coaches who are probably a little bit more progressive in their thinking, and they've been, fair play to the FA and the Premier League. They're trying to educate those coaches in that way, and so I think that helps as well with sort of the battle against the resistance within the system. But yeah, I think the coaches are starting to get it. So they're starting to understand that actually we need to look at the player, not just the player, but the person behind the player, and kind of make sure that they're all right and develop them holistically as well, and kind of make sure that that what they're getting out of their time at the academy keeps them wanting to come back as well. So it's not just about I'm going to be a footballer. It's actually about I really enjoy what I do, and it's great, and I'm developing, I'm progressing, I'm learning new skills, not just technical skills, but new psychological skills. So I'll probably touch on this in a little bit later. So looking at the PCDEs, they are quite generic. So trying to teach these skills so that whatever happens, because the numbers, people don't want to talk about the numbers in academy football, but the chances of making it through to having a successful first team career is, bordering on the ridiculous. To be fair, so people are going to end up doing other things, and one of the things that I personally really like about the PCDE framework is that basically we're teaching transferable skills. We're teaching skills for maximising performance across whatever you do, whether it be sport, whether it be dance, whether it be business, whatever. It's things like being able to deal with pressure and managing yourself, managing your emotions and your attentional control. All these things, creating support networks around you to help you through the tough times. All these things are vital in whatever you do. So I think that's really important. And I think certainly within the academy now, we've got to a point where pretty much everyone's on board and understands why we do it.
Well, let's have some fun with this. Let's hone in on these psychological characteristics of developing excellence. And you mentioned the 10 that are there. And you mentioned two amazing names, Anya McNamara and Professor Dave Collins from, at the moment, UCLan, University of Central Lancashire in England. And they've done a lot of work on PCDEs. But it stems from, I think it's the work of Terry Orlick and John Partington way back in, I think it's 1988, isn't it?
Yeah. And then they're, to be fair to Anya and Dave, they're the first to mention that as well. I think so. The kind of in pursuit of excellence and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, mental skills.
Yeah, that's Terry Orlick's book, isn't it? In Pursuit of Excellence. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. But the research work that kind of in that book as well. But yeah, Dave and Anya, they've done a lot of work looking at how these translate specifically to sport and in these types of talent development environments.
So let's go through each one, and obviously there'll be some familiar terms, some familiar concepts or constructs, but let's try and unpack these.
Yeah.
So what's that first one that you mentioned, Andy?
Commitment to role clarity.
Commitment to role clarity. Can you sort of briefly describe what you mean by that?
Yeah, well, this, you've got to be committed to what you do, and you've got to have a clear understanding of what it is that you're trying to do. Yep. The thing with PCDEs is that they operationalize differently at different ages, different levels, and in different environments.
Do you mean they're defined differently?
Yeah. So I think, the examples that we kind of come back to is, say, if you're looking at a young rugby player, who's and a coach might describe him as very committed. Now that might look like to one coach tackling really, really hard. To another coach, it might be the kid that turns up late and leaves early, because what they're trying to do is they have to take 3 buses to get to training and straight from school, and they have to leave early to walk 2 miles to the next bus stop to then get the last bus home. So that's commitment as well. And I think that's for a system based on PCDEs to work. I think a lot of work beforehand needs to be done on what do these things look like. And even within, they look differently at different ages. So what does commitment look like to a 9-year-old football player at one academy to a 9-year-old footballer at another academy as well? So it's quite vague, but basically you have to be committed to what you do. So I think it taps into some of the motivational work that's out there.
Okay.
Why do people want to do understanding the player and why do they want to do this? And the real clarity around is what is that player expected to do. So they know, they have a good idea of what they should be working on and why they're doing it.
So what I hear you say is that, and we're talking about a commitment to role clarity. So that commitment at all of the PCDEs, but that commitment might be different at different ages. So under 12s, under 14s, under 16s, under 18s, and it's very, very useful for coaches to get together and actually define what they look like, essentially, or how they're going to define them at each age group. Is that what you're saying?
100%. So that's something that we've done in the past, and we decided, what does commitment look like? Well, commitment looks like just come to training 3 days a week, and for a lot of people that's a big commitment.
Yep.
That was just one part of it, but once we know as a system what it looks like, we can then promote it. We can then basically give them a reason to come to training, if you will, and make it easier for them to commit, make it more enjoyable, those sorts of things. Further up the tree, if you will, what does commitment look like for a scholar? Well, is it engaging with all the extra practice without us having to tell them? And do they know that? And do they understand that actually that's probably what they need to do to get there where they need to be?
Interesting, because that's obviously and quite necessary in many cases. That's quite top down. Are there circumstances where these can be quite bottom up driven? And I suppose by that I mean player driven. So you might do this with older age groups, whereby under 18s are actually, here's your PCDEs. What does commitment look like to you?
Yeah, 100%. And you tend to and again, this is out there in the PCDE research, is that further down the tree, the younger the kids are, quite often will kind of model these types of behaviours for them. So people will help, whether it be a teacher, whether it be a parent or a coach, will help them do things. So an easier example of that might be something like goal setting. So the act of goal setting is important, but for the younger children, do they have to goal set particularly? No. Do they have to be aware of it and involved in the process? Yes, but that'd be something you could help them with. And then as they get older, it was okay, all right, so what are your goals? Why have you picked that? Where are your processes that underpin that outcome, the performance goals? And obviously, as they're used to doing it and they've seen it done and they've done bits of it, the older they get, they do more and more and more. Because ultimately what we're trying to do is create autonomous athletes. So you're exactly right. It starts off fairly top down, but over time you want it to invert, so it becomes bottom up. But like I said, these are skills. So at some point there has to be a teaching of the skill.
Okay.
And then lots and lots of practice, and then hopefully that you internalize a bit, and they see the value in doing these things, and they go out and do it themselves. So we're starting to see that now as we've had the system in place for a few years, and all the best players have always done these things anyway. It's nothing new. It's I suppose like anything in psychology, it's just we're putting a label on it, I suppose. So these players will do these things, and all the best players have done them. So like I said, it's nothing new. It's These things have always happened, and it's very much just a case of us trying to manage that process and maximize it, really make it more as effective as we can do.
You're trying to manage that process. You said something really interesting. These are, yes, we want autonomous athletes. So by that you mean we want the athletes, the players, the consumers of this stuff to be able to drive their own psychological characteristics. But there is a teaching element. These are mental skills. These are skills. There's a teaching element here. So how do you go about that, Andy, in your environment? How will you go about teaching these skills?
I think one of the first things is that nobody wants a solution to a problem that they don't know that they have. So we try and sell them the problem before we sell them the solution. So, what happens if you don't have this? What happens if you can't deal with the pressure? What happens if you are unorganized? What happens if you can't control your emotions? And then, first of all, create the need and get them to recognize the need themselves. So they start to, it just helps with the sell, I suppose, in that they're a bit more open to actually learning, because a lot of these kids are, say, if they come in on day release, they take a day out of school, they come to play football, they want to be out on the grass. The last thing they want to do is be sat in the classroom for 40 minutes with me, or anyone else, I would assume as well. But yeah, it's kind of letting them understand that there's actually a need for this in the first instance, and then we have fun with it, really, and we try and do. I think the first thing we try and do is we try and kind of teach them the basics. If they've not done it before, we'll teach them why they need to do it, different ways it could be done, and kind of what's going to work for them a little bit, really, as well. For example, something like focus and distraction control, depending on your philosophy as a psychologist, as a practitioner, there's a million different ways you could go about addressing that. If you CBT or your ACT or whatever, they're very, very different. So that's something that we're having to try and pin down at the moment now. That's not just me. It's kind of right. What is our kind of departmental philosophy, if you will, on how are we going to deliver these things? So get the kids, introduce them to it. But I think the big thing that we try and do is these skills are going to be deployed on the grass. So that they need to be developed and honed on the grass as well. So we teach them the building blocks, if you will, in a classroom setting. But to be fair, a lot of the work is done on the pitch and by the coaches as well. So I know Dave Collins talks about a way of delivering it. It's teach, tweak, test, repeat. I think I've got that the right way around. But it's teaching them the skills and then giving them the chance to practice those skills in a context that is going to be where they need to deploy them, and then tweak it and then keep going with it. So we're having to develop the coaches as well around how do they best incorporate PCDEs into what they do. I know PCDEs is now something that are taught on the advanced youth modules as part of the FA's coaching qualifications as well, which makes my life a bit easier, to be fair. But but one of the things that we do is we're trying to put a program in with the coaches at the moment around embedding these psychological skills in what they do. So I think you say to a coach that actually I need you to teach the kids psychology as well, they're going to sort of answer you very, very bluntly and in no uncertain terms, you must be joking. So we try to come up with a framework, if you will, that kind of sits on top of what they do, because coaches, a lot of coaches do a really good job, and that they put a lot of thought into what they do. And then I think as psychs, for us to come along and say, well, actually, you need to do this, I would probably not giving them the respect they probably deserve in a lot of instances. So I think what we came up with a framework, if you will, to help them embed those psychological skills. So the first thing that they need to do is set the context and the challenge within that. So if you wanted to get someone who's going to recover well from setbacks, then you've got to create failure. So you've got to create, whether it be a drill or a session or whatever, where there is going to be a very low level of success. Sometimes for a coach that can be quite difficult. It feels quite unnatural to them because you want your sessions to go well. We're actually trying to design a session in this instance to go badly. You've got to create the challenge, and it's got to be quite difficult. Not too difficult, but there's got to be a level of difficulty in there around the thing you want to develop. You've got to run that session and sort of and tweak it as necessary. So as people start to meet that challenge, does that challenge need to ramp up again, or is the challenge as the session goes on, do I need to dial it back a bit because we're getting no success, we're just getting all failure, and how much is that going to impact on player motivation, things like that. And when they manage to achieve the outcome, or they're persistent in trying to achieve that outcome, sort of reward that engagement and embed the learning. So we've got the context, we've got to run the session, we've got to embed the learning. But for me, there's always, and that had happened for quite a while, but for me, there had been a step missing in that process. And what we looked at was looking at orienting the player to the challenge ahead. So actually saying to the player, right, this is the challenge, and where do you foresee your difficulties are going to be for you? What are going to be the problems in this? What are you going to struggle with? And then, so how are you going to meet that challenge? And having that conversation before the session begins, or before that drill begins. So orienting the player to that. And we found that's been really, really helpful. It also makes for a nicer acronym. So we've got CORE. It kind of works a bit better. But what we do find is that addressing that challenge in a cooler state before the emotion ramps up, it also takes away the surprise element as well. So we're predominantly dealing with a lot of teenagers, and there's been obviously there's a lot of research done on the neurological differences of the teenage brain, and I think Sarah Jane Blakemore's book can probably get another plug on this show, because that is a really good book around this. But actually taking dialing the temperature down and just having a cool conversation with the player. All right, so this puts you onto your weaker foot. You're 2v1 down, 2v1 against. Sorry. How are you going to meet that challenge? What are you going to do? What kind of things could you try? And it almost creates a challenge mindset as well. But orienting the play to what lies ahead is massive. So they don't just go into it, think, well, this is no good, I can't do it. And then quite often you do see players in that setting not downing tools, but just more going through the motions, I think.
My interpretation of what you just said, when you add in the orientate piece, is you're turning implicit learning into explicit learning. Now, this is just my interpretation, and I love what you say, because actually before you said that, I was going to ask you about this, because it's all very well, and this is just my opinion, but it's all very well to say, well, let's create an activity whereby it's going to be a really, really tough challenge. We're going to stretch the players. There's going to be less space, or 6v4, so it's tougher for the 4, or manipulate the task, so it's particularly tough for certain individuals. And then they just go out and they do it. And there's an element of implicit learning in terms of getting more resilient as a consequence of that. But I think that's there, and that can be useful and it can be important. But what I love about what you said with the orientate piece is actually you're making it much more overt. You're making it explicit. You're giving the coaches an opportunity to speak with the player, warn them, ask them what strategy they might use, test whether they're going to use that strategy, and then they can have a conversation afterwards. Well, how well do you think you did that? Well, give me a mark out of 10, etc., etc.
Absolutely, and I think what it does, it helps bridge that classroom to pitch divide. So we've given you some of these things in the classroom, and we're actually telling you now, this might be when you need some of them. We might not tell you which ones you need, but we need to get you thinking and get the players into the habit of thinking, right, I have a problem here, how do I solve it? And, there's, as with many things in psych, I think debates get over polarized, sort of the explicit versus the implicit stuff. It's just one example. So the dynamical systems thing, where's the role for cognition in that? And I think for me, I think ultimately we've done it. We found it works, and I think that's the important thing. It does work on the ground. The coaches can do it. Coaches have these types of conversations anyway, but just giving them a little bit of a framework, giving them the types of questions that they might feel that questions that they feel that they could ask, just to reduce a little bit of their anxiety around it, because they're not psychologists. There's uncertainty there about their role, but help just to kind of clarify that, really.
They're not psychologists, but coaches and managers are going to be more impactful with their brand of psychology than us, because they're just in that position. They're in a more influential position, and that's the way it should be. But equally, and I come back to this, psychosocial drives the tech tac and physical side, is that coaches, and I want to get your thoughts on this, mate, because I'll make a statement here. Coaches, in my humble opinion, need to understand that psychology is happening every single second on that pitch, irrespective of what activities they're doing and what their objectives are. They might have a tech-tac objective, they might have a physical objective primarily, but psychosocial is still happening every single second. So to divorce psychosocial from any activity is just simply, it's not a misnomer, it's just untrue.
I'm not 100% with you on that one. 100% with you on that one. And again, just going back to that gym example, it underpins how people get to where they are. Psychology is not just the study of what goes on in your head; it's the study of human behaviour as well. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to develop behaviours. I think there's a few issues there. I think as psychologists, I think sometimes we can be a bit precious over what psychology is and who should be doing it. And that was something I was guilty of, certainly when I first started out in football, and recognizing that actually there's a lot of good work that goes on. So I then started to change the way I saw my role, and it became more of a way of, how can I help these coaches kind of refine and better understand what it is that they're doing, and helping them to unpick their own methods and understand how the psychology of what they do kind of works, if that makes sense. I think there's that element, but absolutely it does all boil down to psych. So if we can help them feel more comfortable with this sort of stuff, and having these psyche conversations with their athletes, reducing that level of anxiety and understanding exactly like you said. I think the difference between psychology and sports psychology, that's key. It's a tough question.
Yeah, I tell you what, Andy, I'm going to fractionally, I love what you're saying, and I'm going to fractionally challenge you on the notion that we as psychologists are precious. And maybe I'm being precious about being precious, but I actually think we're very good as a profession in saying that this needs to be integrated into the coaching program. I actually think we've been not knocking down the door, we've been sledgehammering down the door for I don't know how many years, saying integrate here, and that nobody for 1 minute is suggesting that we should be at 3 o'clock, 10 to 3 on a Saturday afternoon, standing in the front of the players and giving them a speech about psych. Nobody's saying that. I've never come across that. There are clearly things related to mental health and well-being and welfare where we may be in the best position to deliver to players from an isolated perspective. In terms of mental skills, I always feel that we as a profession have been pretty competent at saying mental skills need to be integrated, and we're passionate about helping you, the coach. And look, coaches have a brutally hard job in terms of helping players participate, progress, perform. Beyond a lot of people's comprehension, coaching is enormously challenging. But let's make that easier. We're here to help you as coaches make that an easier ride in many respects by helping you have appropriate solutions. And I love what you said there in terms of how you've seen your role as actually sitting down with a coach, and this is my interpretation of what you've said, is sitting down with a coach and helping that coach understand themselves and understand how they like to deliver psychology in their own unique brand, whilst probably helping them understand what the research says as well, and what probably best practice says as well, so that there's this beautiful coming together of evidence-based practice, practice-based evidence, and the individual approach that coach would like to take. Your thoughts on that, mate?
You've made some really, really good points there, and I think to be fair, I think you're right that as a profession we've done a lot of banging on the door. And
we need to be better, mate. We need to be better. I'm the first one to say that on Twitter.
That's going to be my point, is that, and I'm probably thinking more towards first team football on this one, particularly when I'm up with this example. But we've been saying we need to integrate, and we've been saying we're not. There's the mental health, the well-being thing there that we are there for, but that's a part of what we do. And there's that 5 to 3 bit just to help. But what I would say is, why have we not got to where we want to be as yet? And for me, because in my experience, and to be fair, I can only talk about that we're not integrated with coaching as well as we probably need to be. There is that perception of, well, we have a mental health or a well-being issue here, go see the psychologist. There's that whole element of, one of the phrases that we hear quite a lot is, such a guy's head's fallen off, you need to go and have a word with him. All right, so very reactive. But that is the way it is. I've personally found it. It's not the only way it is. There's a lot of good relationships that are out there, but I would say, if we've done all we can, why aren't we where we need to be as a discipline? And I think there's lots of reasons why. I think there's uncertainty still around what a sports psych does and doesn't do, and where they can help with. So what would be our role within a performance team? There's uncertainty around differentiating between sports psychologist, NLP practitioner, a motivational speaker, a lifestyle coach. They're all, a lot of these guys are about there filling the space that I feel we should be in. And I think what we probably need to do is have a look at what they're doing right. How are they getting in? In these cases, and can we, dare I say it, learn bits from them, even if it's just from a sales and marketing point of view? How do these guys position themselves to get into these doors, when really, if we were there, as sports psychs, potentially we could offer a much bigger performance impact. There's a lot of people out there who aren't sports psychs who do good work. I think that's important to acknowledge as well. But again, for coaches, particularly again, sort of first team football, as you'll know, there's so much anxiety in first team football. People, the job security just isn't there. People are looking over their shoulder. People have got reputations that they trade on, and all this kind of people need to feel that they can control what's happening in their environment. The decision makers need to feel like they're in control. And if there's that element of uncertainty around what sports psych does, then you're not going to get in. So I think there needs to be more work done on education, and I think a lot of it is being humble if you do get the chance to be in there, to kind of really almost not be a threat and recognize that actually you play a small part in a much bigger machine. But I still think we're doing a lot of good stuff as far as the coaching goes. But I do think because we're not where we want to be, there's still a long way to go.
Andy, I think you make a lot of really, really good points there, and I think the challenge is multidimensional, as you're kind of alluding to. It's not unidimensional. It's not just one thing. Probably in the past I've been guilty, and others have been guilty of saying, "Oh, well, it's psychology comes burdened by definition." People think psychology problem, and there's a couple of things you said there that kind of alluded to that. I think our training needs to be better. I remember coming out of my master's degree was brilliant and wonderful, but I think our master's degrees, our qualifications can be quite theoretical rather than applied, and we all go through supervision where the applied work is obviously that's where it lies. But I think, at university we could do more applied work. I remember talking to some of my former colleagues during my master's, and by the end of it they said, that was awesome, that was cool, really interesting, but I wouldn't know the first thing about being a sports psychologist now. So I think there's that. So that's probably a very small thing but relevant. I think as well, and I'd like to get your comment on this, is one thing I've been thinking about over the last year is as you're kind of saying, how we sell ourselves, or how we help coaches, how we help people in sport understand what sports psychology is. And one of the things I've started saying is, look, as a sports psychologist, you're probably working on 4 levels, but let's look at 3 levels, because you can work on the organization level, which is relevant, but let's put that to the side to the second. When you go into a soccer club or a baseball, basketball, tennis, golf, whatever it is, you're looking at 3 levels, aren't you? You're looking at above the line, which is your performance psychology piece, which for me, the mental skills, and everybody is invested there. And that's what we're talking about with the PCDEs. And I think that's where it needs to be integrated. I think that's where we need to work closely with coaches, with their activities. And it's where we can still be involved with players. It doesn't just have to be with coaches. We can sit one-to-one with players. We might not sit one-to-one with a 9-year-old, but we probably will with a soccer scholar at the age of 17. So I think it's both integrated and isolated. I think you've then on the line, you've got the welfare and the wellness piece, which might be a bit more, I think that needs to be integrated within the organisation, but also perhaps a bit more isolated as well. And that's where as a sports psych you might see more of individuals. And then you've got the below the line piece, which is the mental health piece, which actually as a sports psychologist, we might actually bring in a clinical psychologist if an organisation has the resources to have that. So performance psychology, welfare and well-being underneath that, and mental health underneath that, and probably right up top might be helping the organisation as a whole. So really those 3 or 4 levels. What's your thoughts on that, Andy?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think I think the way I like to work is very much on different levels and different areas you can apply performance psych to. So you've got your one-to-one work, you've got your working within a competition environment, your training, looking at team dynamics, all above the line stuff, if you will. And if you're lucky enough to work at a system and organisational level. I think you can have a lot of impact there, but that's very difficult to get to. But yeah, I think I've been quite lucky, really, in that in many ways that my educational background was primarily a coaching background, and I think that's really helped me try and integrate what I do as a performance psych into coaching. And I mean, it's been an absolute nightmare in other areas around things like accreditation and doing extra courses left, right, and centre to try and fill gaps. But from an applied on the ground point of view, I think it's really helped. And I think around that education element, you know, I'd make the argument that I think there's a role for that coaching education, if it's not already in there from the psych point of view, sports psych, to integrate it then, which will then hopefully help the integration further down the line, so that psychs have a better appreciation of coaching, and again keep chipping away at the coach education around the psychological aspects of what they do as well, because I know it's there within football. I couldn't tell you about many other sports because I've not been privy to their coach ed processes, but you know, I think we probably need to help ourselves land better in these types of environments. We need to have probably a really good understanding of coaching as we come in.
I think so. I think. I mean, what's your thoughts on psychologists? Part of their compulsory education, we have to go through supervision, so we learn frameworks, psychological frameworks, to be able to help change behaviour, to help people find solutions to their specific challenges, psychological and otherwise. I think what I hear you possibly say here is maybe psychologists possibly need to coach. They need to have an experience of coaching. There possibly needs to be more coaching education within their psychological education. I know, having been a golf coach, a lot of my time coaching golf has had an enormous influence on me as a sports psychologist. I think that coaching piece is so important, isn't it?
Absolutely. So within my role working with para table tennis, for example, I've got 16, 17 athletes and 4 coaches who I can work with throughout the week. And that's just about manageable in the hours that I'm there. But to go back to the football, I'm responsible in theory for, depending on what point in the season it is, anywhere up to 190 developing footballers, a team of maybe 25 to 30 coaches. And on top of that, I have to provide education and support to anything up to 380 parents. And even when I was full-time, 37 and a half hours a week, the numbers don't stack up. So you have to work through the coaches for me. And to do that effectively, you need a good understanding of coaching, you know, and I think, I'm not going to stand here and say that, you know, performance psych accreditations, whichever, you know, the basis of BPS, they need to incorporate coaching practice into what they do. But what I would say is it certainly wouldn't do any harm, and it would help. It would definitely help. It would help people land better. Having said that, you know, I'm going to say I've got the coaching background, and then I came in and I made all the same mistakes that any neophyte psych would make, you know, forcing solutions, telling people how to do the job that they've been doing for 20 years, you know, all these sorts, inadvertently, but still all these mistakes that we all make and we all reflect on and we all think, yeah, probably shouldn't have done that. And then we look back 12 months down the line and just cringe at the fact that these happen. But coaching is a skill, you know, coaching is a discipline in its own right, and it's complex. And if we want to work in that environment, we really need to understand it as well as we understand, or as well as we feel we understand, human behaviour. and we need to understand coaching and coaching methods and what coaches are trying to achieve.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now you mentioned there working in para table tennis. Now, as a very bad table tennis player, and I've realised this having worked at football clubs, and they all have table tennis players, and every footballer seems to be really good at table tennis. And I'm particularly poor at table tennis, so I've lost most of the games I've played. In fact, I think I won once, which was quite remarkable, and I've been celebrating that since. How's that been? I know you've only just started, so you might not have much to report back, but the psychology of table tennis, that seems really interesting. It's such a quick sport, isn't it, mate?
It is, and I think it contrasts really, really well in just about every way imaginable to the role at the football club.
Okay.
So it's team versus individual, it's development versus elite, it's professional sport versus funded Paralympic sport. And it's really, really different. And coming into it knowing nothing about the sport as well was a challenge. I am learning quickly. Similar to yourself at the football club, there's a table tennis table. People we got it a month before I started the new role, and expectation has gone through the roof. But my argument to that is that I've been at the football club for 4 years and I'm still not good at football, so don't expect anything. But yeah, it's very, very different, but in some ways it's exactly the same. You're dealing with people who want to achieve goals that are really meaningful to them, people who want to get the best out of themselves, working with coaches who want to develop people. And I think the big thing that I've kind of come back to is that it's about people, it's about the interactions between people and how we can help those interactions. So how can we help coaches interact with their athletes and get the most out of their athletes and each other? That's the same. But the table tennis thing is very, very, like I said, the sport's very different. But at the same time, there is a lot of similarities. It is early days. I'm still getting my head around it. But it's about trying to bring your best you to every performance. So doing that as best you can.
I think what's really interesting about what you said, because as you said, individual sport, but then it sounds like a big part of your role is helping the relationship between coach and player from a communication perspective. I'm guessing, but it's almost like it's a team sport within an individual sport.
Yeah, so they train as a team. It's a centralized program. It's
okay.
They train with each other day in, day out.
Yeah.
They're at tournaments. They could be playing against each other in a final and then playing with each other the next day in a teams event. So there's kind of a weird dynamic going on there. But that seems to be managing itself quite well at the moment, on the whole.
And I assume you'll use the PCDE model with the table tennis?
Well, bizarrely, we're not doing it at the moment. And the reason for that is that I've come in mid-cycle. I've taken over from a very good psych who I know, and there's a lot of good work going on. So I think for me, a lot of it was coming into that. Again, we're only sort of less than 16 months off Tokyo for the Paralympics.
Yeah.
So it's now certainly not the right time to be implementing my own ideas. I think what works for the people, what have they done, and building upon that. So it's been having to flex my style quite a lot, which has been a challenge, but really, really good. So a good challenge to have, and kind of just building the relationships and kind of building on the good work that's already been done, really. So the PCD thing, that might come a little bit further down the line, but again, if you go back to what they are, things like focus and distraction control as a PCDE, we work on that all the time. Self-regulation, that emotional control. It's the kind of thing we work on all the time, irrespective. And so I think a lot of these things are getting hit, but they're probably not labelled as PCDEs.
It's a different structure, different formula, or a bit more laissez-faire in that respect, a bit more sort of individual driven.
So a lot of it is what works for that particular athlete, what doesn't work for that particular athlete, and finding that out, and kind of, like I said, building on the good work that's been done before me by the psychs there, and so because like I say, it's much easier for me to flex at this point in an Olympic cycle than it will be for the athletes to try and get their head around something new. And you want to come in, you want to land with minimal disruption, and then from that point build on impact, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And Tokyo's, as you say, 18 months away, so the pressure is building.
Yeah, pressure's building. It's qualification year, so everybody's on the hunt for qualification points and trying to get out there. So recently been out in Slovenia, which was would have just been a fairly standard tournament, but this year it became the biggest table tennis tournament ever, including able-bodied. Terms of 450 athletes there, all trying to fight for as many qualification points as they can get their hands on, really. And I think that will be the case right through till the end of March, where qualification ends. So that will be a particular challenge, not knowing who will be going to Tokyo until quite late in the day, relatively speaking. So how we manage that will be something to think carefully about.
And looking to the future, what does the future hold for you, mate? So you're at what might 5 or 10 years down the line look like for you, do you think?
I haven't a clue. If I look back 15 years, I was working in a record shop. So if I was to say I'd have been here having this conversation with yourself, talking about what we're talking about, I'd have laughed in my own face, I think, really. So yeah, what I'd like to do is I'd like to, just keep getting better myself to start with, and just kind of hone my craft. I'm really enjoying working with two different sports simultaneously, two contrasting sports. Which I think from my point of view, I can feel that improvement happening already, and cross-pollination of ideas, and why do these things work here but not there, that sort of stuff. That's really good. I think a lot of my goals that I have set have been outside of psych for myself, and just sort of more tuned to my values, where I'd like myself and my family to be in 10, 15 years time. And I'm just really, really lucky that I can do that. I could hopefully achieve those through doing something that through a career I probably kind of stumbled upon in many ways, but really, really happy that I have done. I'd like to just keep working at the highest level I can, being the best I can be. It's for me, it's always been about helping people achieve their dreams, if you will, and kind of maximize the potential within others, whether that's in, like I say, in business management that I've done in the past, whether that's in coaching, in psych, but working in psych in whatever area, being in a position where I can pick and choose who I want to work with and when, would be a very nice place to be. However, I suppose that's the chasing a unicorn there, I think.
It's the dream for us all. I think the dream for us all. And look, it sounds like you're doing some really exciting work at Blackburn and with table tennis, with the Tokyo Olympics coming up. And it was really good conversation with regard integration of psychology into organisations, working with coaches and PCDEs. And I know that people will want to tap into your knowledge more, Andy. So where can people find you? How can people get in touch?
I think the best one's probably Twitter, so it's just at Andy Hill 1. And yeah, just you always give us a message in there, and then conversations can pick up off the back of that. I'm quite active on Twitter, probably less so on the other formats of social media, but that would be the one. So at Andy Hill 1. But yeah, I'm always up for a chat about anything related to psych or performance or sport.
Absolutely. Well, look, Dr. Andy Hill, thank you so much for joining me today. I really enjoyed that chat. There's lots of diverse conversation there, lots of different topics, and I hope you did too. Please let me know what you think. You can do that via Twitter or Facebook or through my website, danabrahams.com. Tell me what you think of the Sports Psych show. Are there any guests that you'd like to listen to? I can't always promise that I can deliver on that, but I will certainly try my best. I'm really looking forward to next week's episode. Bye for now.